Hello, everyone, and welcome to this History of Western and World Civilizations course at SUNY Delhi. My name is Dan Gashler, and I am broadcasting to you pre-recorded from my bunker. This is probably my favorite course to teach at SUNY Delhi. On the one hand, it is a required survey course. On the other hand, we deal with the entire world. So what that means is that those of you taking this class, because it's required, come from all different backgrounds. You have perspectives from across the spectrum, whereas the content we deal with is also from the entire world. We deal with people uh, from everywhere. So the kind of discussions that we get going in this class are really cool, and I find them exciting, and I hope that we can replicate those discussions in an online format as well. So the first thing that you need to do is go over the syllabus and make sure that you understand the requirements of this course. Given that we're doing this in an online format, I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So each week, you'll have two mandatory assignments. One is that you need to email me a set of focus questions based on the required readings that are listed in the syllabus. The second mandatory weekly assignment um, is that you need to post one post of your own. Oh, just a second, my son is calling me. This is going to be hard to do. All right, so I'm back. The whole reason I built this bunker was to avoid getting distracted by my kids. In the spring, when coronavirus first shut us down, I was teaching from a little corner of their playroom next to their pet turtle, and that was not as ideal. So even though I have a bunker now, it seems like they can still find me. So, anyways, the second mandatory assignment is that there's a discussion board, and each week I want you to answer the discussion question that I give to the entire class by Wednesday or by Thursday night. And then by Sunday night of each week, I want you to post on two of your classmates' comments. So the idea is to somewhat replicate the dynamic we have in a classroom. And as I've done this in the past, the discussion boards actually work incredibly well as long as you take them seriously. When you're in a classroom discussion, you might get a far-ranging, interesting conversation, but when you do it online in a discussion board format, people have the time to really think about what they're saying first. So I think the level of discourse can be significantly higher. So to repeat, the two mandatory weekly assignments that you're going to have are focus questions, which are posted on Banco Hall and associated with the required readings that you find listed in your syllabus. The syllabus is at the top of Ankle Hall. I want those emailed to me by Sunday night of each week, and then the discussion board. And I want your initial discussion board to be done by Thursday night, and then your follow up on two of your classmates by Sunday night. So, in addition to that, there are going to be two papers due over the course of the semester, and those are outlined in the syllabus. So, please read the syllabus, understand what the syllabus is all about, and email me if you have any questions. Some of you have emailed me already, so that's really cool. You're on the ball. Okay, and the way I grade is each of these four assignment categories are worth 25% of the course grade. So all of the discussion boards are worth 1/4 of the grade. Each paper is worth 25% each, and the focus questions are worth 25%. So in addition, I've got a PowerPoint slides. This you're looking at a narrated version of one. I'll also post these on Banco Hall for you to look at. Um, if you view these and really critically think about them each week, they will help you contextualize the readings. They'll certainly help you make more sense of your focus questions. And there are also bonus questions at the end of these. The bonus questions are going to be worth 10% of the overall course grade. So that's, I like the idea of extra credit that works kind of like compounding interest. You get credit for the extra credit, but doing the extra credit helps you to better understand the course material and really engage with what we're doing. So, uh, all right, let me see if I can shrink myself out of this frame so you can look just at the materials we're dealing with. There we go. I'll stay here like one of those cool YouTube stars or something. Um, I'm having a hard time shrinking myself. There we go. Okay, so this week I really want to contextualize the centuries before this class begins. This is a course in Western civilization and world history. So I want you to think about what the term West means. As a little hint, it's a construct. But generally, when we use the term West today, we're referring to Europe and North America. But for much of the modern period, which historians date from roughly the time of the French Revolution, 1789, until today, or perhaps until 1945, and we today live in the postmodern period, the West, throughout this period, has had disproportionate power and wealth compared to the rest of the world. It wasn't always that way, though, and what I want to briefly historicize this week and a little bit next week is how this came to be. Then, for the rest of the course, we'll be dealing with the modern world, where the power of the West is a given, though by no means expected to continue indefinitely. Certainly, if you watch the news, you know that we're in a major global reconfiguration right now. So, what does that mean? Well, looking back at history will help us better contextualize and understand where we are today. So, let's see, can I make it change slides? There we go. Okay, so this second slide deals with the period of late antiquity, when the collapse of Roman stability, as well as Han Chinese stability, led to reduced levels of societal and political complexity in many parts of Europe and the broader Mediterranean region. This is sometimes called the Dark Ages, a term that was invented during the Renaissance to distinguish their period of innovation from what came before. Most historians today find the term Dark Ages a little bit too simplistic, um, but and sometimes even inaccurate, as it denies the innovations of people at that time. But the lack of Roman power after the fall of the Western Roman Empire was felt across the region they once controlled. In Europe, the biggest contenders for the mantle of Rome's legitimacy, i.e., posers who tried to pass themselves off as the real Rome, were the Byzantine Empire, which was in fact the former eastern half of the Roman Empire. So it actually was Rome, just much reduced in size and power, and the Roman Catholic Church, which through its large clergy had a rough idea of who people were and had power to collect things like tithes or taxes. So for centuries, European monarchs would try to co-opt the power of the church in order to better rule over their realms. Church leaders never liked that, which led to a lot of conflict. So the third entity which I list here is Russia, which after Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, fell to the Ottomans, called itself the Third Rome. So the first Rome was Rome, the second Rome was Constantinople, and the third one was Moscow. Mussolini, by the way, would call his government the same thing. So another group, which frequently referred to itself as the successor of Rome, was to the south, where in the centuries after Rome fell to Ostrogothic conquerors, Western Rome, the forces of Islam established the Umayyad Caliphate, which stretched across North Africa and the Middle East. So superficially, the world of Islam, Dar al-Islam, and Christianity had a lot of similarities. Christianity split early on between Eastern and Western varieties. In the East, the patriarch was subservient to the emperor. In the West, the pope was generally more powerful than the kings. And in Islamic empires, the fact that that Muslims were often in the minority meant that religious control over politics was both impractical and unuseful. So one thing that religious societies had to grapple with in this period was how to deal with all of the accomplishments of classical empires, both Rome and especially my kid's calling to me again. I'll be right back. That not being the case, and we know how bad that can be. Within the Islamic world, that was much less of a problem. And like I said earlier, part of the reason for that is that in many cases, Muslims were in the minority within empires that proclaimed to be Islamic. Not always the case, but very often the case. And so to use religion as a source of legitimacy wouldn't work for people who didn't believe the same way you did. And so you have a long history of Islamic powers developing strong statecraft. But this is going to change. So, where was I now? So, One thing that religious societies everywhere had to deal with in the period of late antiquity was how to deal with all of the accomplishments of classical empires, both Rome and especially the earlier writings of the Greeks, the philosophy of the Greeks in particular. The problem is that both of these traditions, Roman traditions to an extent, but especially classical Greek traditions, came before Christianity and before Islam, which meant that these were pagan thinkers. And in Western Europe, the consensus quite early on was that the wisdom of people like Aristotle was bad. In the Islamic world, a consensus that developed much earlier than it did in the Christian world, so I'm talking Western Europe, but the Islamic world, the broad Umayyad, the Abbasid caliphates, was that even though Aristotle was a pagan, both philosophy and religion lead to the same truth, so it was okay. Western Christians really wouldn't come around to this idea until the 1200s, with those who followed Thomas Aquinas, for instance. So within the Islamic world, you had stability on par with that of China, tolerance, sort of. Generally, Christians and Jews were accepted if they paid an alms tax, the zakat that Muslims were required to pay. Pagans were persecuted. There was acceptance within the Islamic world of science and philosophy, though, with some limits, like it was considered bad to study cadavers. Um, and in the Middle East, there was wealth. So the Middle East was at the center of the ancient Eastern Hemisphere. It was at the center economically as well. Porcelain and silk from China, spices from India, fine goods from Persia, artwork, gold, slaves from Africa, wool, wine, textiles, olives from Western Europe and the Mediterranean, as well as slaves, amber, and honey from Russia, all came through the Middle East. So, while there was certainly cultural and social advantages to this region, having control of global trade was really key. Think of wealthy trade-based areas today like Dubai or Switzerland or New York City, specifically Manhattan. Um, so with this world with an Islamic core, for centuries the world was largely peaceful. Um, East to East Africa. West and Central Africa were incorporated through long distance trade across the Sahara, while South Africa was an outpost for the kingdoms of East Africa. The Mediterranean region prospered on the edge of the Middle East, and Western Europe and Russia, like West and Central and South Africa, were becoming increasingly tied to the rest of the world. So, try to switch slides here. So one key piece of the rise of Western European power was that this archaic world systems, as it's generally been called by historians since the 1980s, came crashing apart over the next 200 years. There are three main disasters that really tore apart much of the fabric of the world. First, the Crusades sharpened existing divisions, but in many cases created divisions between Christians and Muslims in particular, as well as between Jews and Christians. Serious conflict between Jews and Muslims wouldn't really occur until the 20th century. So it doesn't mean that these religious traditions stopped getting along for good, but there was a precedent set that has been remembered and re-remembered far too much over the past centuries that Christians and Muslims in particular shouldn't get along. Sorry, I'm trying to put myself somewhere good. There, that's a good spot. Second, you have the rise of the Mongols, whose bloody conquest destroyed the Song Empire in China, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the empire of the Kiev Rus. They established a world order of their own that would realign things in Eurasia, but they were also terribly destructive. Then, the culmination of them all was the Black Plague. At a basic level, millions of people dying is bad for economies, but it also had a social and philosophical effect on Europeans in particular, with many tying it to later historians tying it to the beginning of the Italian Renaissance, for instance, where Western Europeans wholeheartedly began to embrace Islamic, Greek, and Roman knowledge as a foundation for expanding their own philosophical, artistic, and scientific endeavors. So, for the foundation of Europe's rise, you had first the destruction of a world system where Europe was a bit of a wild frontier region of the world. But Europe's rise didn't happen right away. After the disasters of the 13th and 14th centuries, there was an in between period where a new kind of government began to dominate the world: gunpowder empires, sometimes called Islamic empires. Uh, the terms are somewhat interchangeable. You read about them in your readings for this week. Um, Gunpowder empires, that term refers to the fact that these political entities monopolized the power structure needed to control gunpowder, which was a huge deal with 1400s technology, and therefore they were very hard to resist. They became the new dominant powers in the world. They were governments that were based on powerful, expanding militaries whose governing was left to loyal governors who owed their positions to generally emperors. Eventually, their descendants, the descendants of these local rulers, would get comfortable in their regions and start to act independently of the center, thereby weakening the gunpowder empires in competition with tightly structured, well funded European states. Empires that were kind of key in this period, some of those gunpowder empires that you're going to read about, included the brief dominion of Tamerlane. You've got its spin-off, the Mughal Empire of India, the Safavids of Persia, the Ottomans of the Middle East and southeastern Europe, the Empire of Muscovy in Russia, and to some extent, perhaps even the Ming Dynasty in China. Though they would all quickly become, the Ming would become a more typical Chinese feudal state. So at the same time in Europe, the ever uneasy confusion between whether kings, the church, or the nobility were in charge led to centuries of conflict and was finally coming to a head in incredibly bloody wars of religion. Trying to switch slides. Okay. Um, So, in the 131 years between when Martin Luther provocatively nailed his theses on the cathedral door in Wittenberg, challenging the church's right to secular power, until the end of the 30 Years' War, millions of Europeans died. The picture here is, oops, move myself up, is of the massacre at Vassy in France, which kickstarted a more violent period of conflict in France that would become known as the French Wars of Religion. After millions of deaths, oops, trying to switch slides. After millions of deaths, European leaders spent 2 years coming up with what was called the Peace of Westphalia, whose main points were that you couldn't go to war over religion anymore, that minority Christian religions had rights that had to be tolerated, and at least you couldn't kill people who disagreed with you anymore. And most importantly, that the state had absolute power, not the nobles, not the church. And especially now that so many Northern Europeans didn't even know which church was in charge anymore, it was really key to suddenly have governments based on the sovereignty of the monarch. So this led to European states favoring efficient administration with a goal to achieve absolute monarchical power. This is also sometimes called the period of absolutism. So, well, Islamic empires or gunpowder empires and Constantinople had once controlled the center of the world. While the wars of religion were ongoing, many European powers were mapping out ways to exploit the resources of the New World. After 1492, the Spanish and Portuguese robbed the continent of its gold and silver, then came upon the idea of using its people as slaves to take even more resources. Eventually, they and other European powers used African slaves to grow New World products on an unprecedented scale. As this power developed, the early structures of capitalism, with the latest technologies of the day, the Atlantic slave trade, became far greater in its oppression than the previous Middle Eastern slave trade had ever been. So, this slave trade also shifted the center of world economic power from the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. This system of horror allowed for the disproportionate growth in the strength of small European states. Since they were also at constant war with each other, these small states also got to be very good at killing. As the wars of religion ended, Europeans followed the Portuguese into the global south, setting up networks of trading and slaving colonies along the southern hemisphere. that would all be jumping off points for the fuller imperialism of the 19th and 20th centuries. The Mughals, a more successful gunpowder empire, also allowed themselves to be divided by opportunistic leaders like Aurangzeb, who pitted Muslims against Sikhs, Christians, and Hindus, causing wars of religion in India, which India had previously been known for its tolerance, just as the wars of religion were ending in Europe. So this made India essentially right picking for Portuguese, French, and especially English colonial and mercantilist exploiters, especially the East India Company. So by the year 1700, it was fairly clear that Europeans were the new masters of the world, though by no means an absolute certainty. Okay, so what you've seen here is a really dense summary of why by 1800 the small countries of Western Europe really were the most powerful countries in the world. So that is the end of our first week. Now feel free to take a stab at some of the bonus questions below. And email me, of course, if you have any questions, and make sure to engage with the discussion board. That's where a lot of the work is going to be happening over the next week, as well as get me your focus questions. So, the work that goes into the focus questions is critical for making sense of these readings, making sense of the class, and really uh, making sense of the world around us, which is the ultimate goal of this class. So here are your bonus questions. I'll try and get my face out of the way so you can pause and look at these. If you email these to me, again, they're not intended to be hard. They're just intended to be a really simple review. If you email these to me, I will give you 5 extra credit points. All right, provided you get them correct. All right, thank you everyone, and enjoy your week.